Abandonment can lead to drinking, anger issues, sexual promiscuity. Abandonment can be the root of bitterness. Abandonment is the source that affects many things in our lives. All kinds of things. It's that trigger. It's the gun. That's what abandonment can be. And so, let's start out with the first story that I want to tell you about. So at our assembly, we're kind of in an interesting place because a lot of times people call us from different areas for assistance. Sometimes we don't know the people. They've heard about us, and so told me to call you because they thought you could help out, etc., etc. In this instance, we were called by somebody that was involved in human trafficking. They'd taken a young lady, they'd taken her down to Acapulco. Acapulco is one of the largest areas for human trafficking. Later on, we found out, of course, that they were going to, a young man was grooming this young lady to get her involved in sex trafficking, obviously, right? So they get her down there, they call me, and of course, we put a plan into motion. We send a team down there, we find the people, we get things involved, and we find the people, we find the gentleman, we find the young girl. We send a team down there. This is all live. It's playing out live. We send a team down there, and the team is monitoring the airport, the exits, the terminals, everything. We managed to bring the young lady back, and at one point when I was discussing with her and talking to her about what was going on, what was driving this decision for you to have a man you don't know buy an airplane ticket for you so you could fly to Acapulco. And of course, she didn't really know what the problem with that was, right? That's a problem. But the more we talked, the more I realized that she had a big problem. And that was that although she had a dad, he wasn't really around. He had been leaving her ever since she was a baby. And so she didn't really have a good, solid relationship with him. Her mother was around, but her mother had a lot of mental health issues, lots of anger, lots of anxiety. And so she's not somebody that she wanted to be hanging out with. In fact, she was somebody that she wanted to run away from. So it was the father who was leaving on a constant basis to go to work. But he would find excuses because he didn't want to be around his wife. And when he left his wife, what happens? He left his children, right? I want to tell you about another story. We received a couple of calls. We've received several calls on a number of occasions from women who were being abused physically, right? Threatened, life-threatening. Now, some of these women we don't know. We don't know that well. But for some reason, when they call you and they think somehow that you're the only ones that can help out, well, you've got to sort of figure out a way to help them out. So again, we put a plan into action. Try to get this lady, connect her with other people that we knew, situated, get you to our place, and then eventually get you to where you need to be near your family because you can't afford, because a lot of women that are abused generally are maltreated and the money's taken away from them from their abusers, so they don't have the ability to just go purchase a bus ticket. And oftentimes it's even deeper than that because it's emotional trauma, emotional abuse. And so they're being constantly told, nobody wants you, nobody's going to help you, you belong to me, you're mine, you're my property, etc., etc., etc. And so we set up again a plan to help this lady out, get your kids, etc., etc. Now I always tell them, obviously we're not in the assisting you to divorce your husband business. But we're also not in the assisting your husband to beat you business either. And so I want you to call so-and-so, and I want them to take a look at you to see if what you're telling me is true. And the call that I got, oh yeah, it's bad. Possibly even concussion. That kind of stuff. Right? And so we set up a plan. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And don't tell him, because I want to tell him at some point in time. When he asks and wonders what happened, then I want to be the one to call and say, yeah, we assisted her because you're a coward. Because you are beating a defenseless woman and you're threatening the children. And therefore, we have no choice, because we will not tolerate. I don't care if she would have told me, oh, he yells at me. Well, it's okay, grin and bear it. But when you use physical attack, I'm talking physical, a fist to the face, a boot to the face, or a boot to the stomach, absolutely no tolerance. So we set up this plan. All right, we're going to get you out of there. We're going to get you out of there. This whole time. But I'm afraid to leave. I'm afraid to be alone. I don't know about leaving. What's going to happen? Well, all of that's going to be up to you. We're just going to help you to get away, and then we're going to work with both of you to help you to reinstitute the marriage, to help you reevaluate why the anger and what's happening. Because we're not into causing or assisting you to divorce. We just want your body, your physical self, to be safe. She ended up not leaving. Why? Because the fear of being abandoned was greater or worse than the beatings. You understand what I'm saying? The fear of being abandoned for many women is greater than the abuse that they're getting. It's a real tangible, realistic problem that we have when the fear of abandonment drives things like fear, anger, bitterness, all those things. That's why I say that abandonment is the fibromyalgia of a lot of people's emotional problems, emotional trauma, and even mental health issues. And I would say even strange self-hurting behavior. Abandonment is driving it. I want to tell you about an 8-year-old boy who thought that everything was perfect with him and his mom. And one day his mom decided to leave. So she took her bags and left. Left him, left his siblings, and she just took off. So this 8-year-old boy followed her to the bus station, to the bus pickup. Like, Mom, where are you going? What's happening? Why are you leaving? What am I going to do? This young 8-year-old boy grew up to be a man, but he realized one thing, that all his life he had missed out on something. He had missed out on having a relationship with his mom, and thereby it affected him in other relationships. He realized that he had a fear of abandonment. Because imagine, what is the biggest fear of all in life? What is the biggest fear of all in life? We all experience it. How many of you here have ever experienced the fear of being abandoned? Everybody should raise their hand if you were a baby. And if your mommy ever went to the grocery store. Now, you don't remember. That's why you're not raising your hand. But your grandmother, your Uncle Joe, could tell you that when your mom went to the grocery store and she dropped you off just for 10 minutes, you whined like it was the end of the world. Why? Because you were experiencing abandonment anxiety as a child. And if you didn't, it's because you didn't love your mom. No, I'm just kidding. You experienced it. Trust me, you experienced it. It's real. We all go through it. So there are 2 times when we are going to experience abandonment. The biggest one, the one we're going to remember the most, is obviously when you're an adult. And Brother Scott talked about that today, about, your mate passes away. Your fear of you having a fear of being abandoned, of being alone. Because technically, that's what abandonment means. It's the act of somebody leaving, right? And you being alone. And then that brings out all kinds of issues, all kinds of complications with you, as it did with this 8-year-old boy. Now, this 8-year-old boy was able to somehow work it out. You know, somehow he reconciled with the fact that even though his mom left, he couldn't go around and just destroy his life. Right? But his siblings, several of them did not. Several of them got real sick. Several of them were angry, unforgiving. To who? To their mother. How dare you leave me? Very unforgiving to their mother. And as a consequence, today, some of his siblings are sick. They've got heart issues. They got high blood pressure issues. They have anger issues. They have relationship problems. They've had relationship problems. Not just with their husbands, wives, but co-workers. They have anger issues. They've had all kinds of conditions that, although you may tell them, hey, you know what, I think you need to forgive. And that was the message that Brother Jason Toe gave yesterday. You need to forgive. It's very difficult for them because of the anxiety of abandonment and the experience that they have. Because like I said, abandonment is the fibromyalgia of many of our emotional and mental problems. If you're a perfectionist, the root cause of it can be abandonment. I say it again. If you're an angry person, the root cause of it could be abandonment. Some researchers did a study in London, and they took 40 adolescents, boys, and they chose them because they realized that those boys who lived in this sort of, I don't know, here, I guess in our area would be kind of like an orphanage, although it wasn't really an orphanage. It was a school for troubled kids, but they weren't criminals. But they, you know, you could tell their families are like, well, you have a lot of issues. Do you think you need to go to that school? And anyway, so these researchers went in there and they interviewed 40 young men who had two qualities that they displayed, and that's what was reported to them. They had no real connection to people. It was difficult for them to connect to people. And they had no empathy for people. No emotion. Some other kid got hurt in the playground. Oh, well, he'll get over it. You know, stop crying, right? And so anyway, so they did this research, and what they found is that all boys, all 40 of them, had problems with abandonment, what they called maternal abandonment. All of them. They all had two things in common, and they found out the third. And the third was that they had been having issues with abandonment from their mothers. And so they kept track of them throughout the years. And they found many of them to be involved in drugs, drinking, low self-esteem, sexual promiscuity, or actions that would put them in danger, or actions that put others in danger without fear or concern. It's a real deal. You know, earlier I told you the story about the young lady who, as we spoke, informed me that she had problems with, basically it was a maternal. So you had a young lady who had problems with her dad, not a good relationship with her dad. Her dad would leave all the time, and so she developed abandonment anxiety, and then that led her to seek attention from the wrong boys. even when she was told about the possibilities of human sex trafficking and about the possibilities of how dangerous it was. And I told you about the lady who called us and said, hey, I need some help. And again, the fear of abandonment led her to stay. Of course, not everybody who has the fear of abandonment does that, right? Not everybody does. But there's many issues, many things that can build up. That's why fibromyalgia, if you know about fibromyalgia, doctors came up with this nice word, but they don't really know what it is. They don't even know how to treat it. They just know it's a multitude of problems. It's a multitude of medical, physical problems. So, okay, we're going to call it fibromyalgia because it's the best thing that we can say. It's a culmination of things that we don't even know. But you've got all kinds of symptoms going on. And that's one of the problems that researchers are dealing with abandonment. And that is that there are a lot of issues that people are dealing with that is very difficult for them to pinpoint. And so, how do you figure out if that's what it is? Because a lot of us are sitting here thinking, well, I've got this problem, I got an anger problem, I got this. Could it be abandonment? Well, it very well could be. And obviously and honestly, you're the only one that can figure that out. However, we do have some clues about quite possibly how you can possibly figure out if you're dealing with abandonment issues. Because in some cases, you may not know. Right? And they're so simple. You guys are going to laugh. Well, maybe you won't laugh, but you're going to be like, oh, yeah. They're so simple. And you don't have to raise your hand and say, hey, I fit that description. But just sort of think about what I'm going to say. If you have a bad relationship with your mother, guess what? You probably have some abandonment issues. And therefore, quite possibly, those things you're struggling with, those difficulties that you're dealing with, that you think it's somebody else's fault, or you think it's because of something that happened to you when you were a teenager, or you think it's because of this, or you think it's because of that, the root of it, again, the root, right? It's at the bottom of everything, and then there's layers that come up. The root of it may just be abandonment. It's not very difficult to say, right? What's the second one? If you have a bad relationship with your dad, or if you've dealt with your dad in a way that just, you just don't have that father-son, father-daughter relationship, and you've dealt with struggles. Maybe you're a perfectionist. Maybe you're angry. Maybe you've been an alcoholic. Maybe you've been into drugs. Right? The root of your issues, and I'm talking at the very root of it, could very well be abandonment. They say that 90% of all addictions for adults start in your teens. 90%, guys, of all addictions as an adult start in your teens. And in your teens is when you're most vulnerable to not understand the difficulties that you may have with abandonment. In your teens is, first of all, when you are strange and you can't help it. because the hormones in your body are causing all kinds of chaos. And you feel frustrated, and you're developing into this humanoid, right? But you've got all kinds of poisons in your mind, all kinds of worries, all kinds of stress. And so you don't develop the way you should be developing in a household where you have a husband and a wife. And I'm not trying to offend anybody here that doesn't have that, because I'm not. Trust me. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because I don't want to leave that out. But the reason the Father created the family structure, the husband and the wife, is so that we as humanoids, as human beings, can have all the good stuff poured into us from our mom and our dad. And then what you get, right, when you're getting the right stuff from this side and you're getting the right stuff from this side, guess what? You're perfectly balanced. And people can come and push you and you're not going to move. They can try to shove you and you're good, because you're standing on ground that the Father developed for all humans, for all people, all over the world. When people are balanced with the right elements from their mom and their dad, they stand firm. But when they don't, I saw this recently. And it was from, I didn't know the guy was Muslim, but not that it matters, because I like the story of what he was saying. He said, I was raised as a Muslim not to eat pork. I've been told from a child that pork is evil, pork is bad, pork is bad, pork is bad. Why? I didn't really know, but I knew I wasn't supposed to eat it. But I grew up as a Muslim, and then I got involved in drugs, I got involved in alcohol, I got involved in pornography, and I got involved in adultery. And it's like, yeah, being a Muslim doesn't really matter, because I'm doing all these things. He said, but I have friends who are Jewish. They are Jewish, and it's the same way for them. They do not eat pork as adults, but they're involved in all kinds of sins. And I remember my son told me one time, because my son, I believe, also were dealing with abandonment issues. I feel like part of his issues as an adolescent was my not understanding the importance of connecting with him and understanding him. And you can be in a place, right? You can be in a room full of people and yet be alone. You can be in a family where the parents think, oh, our family's perfect, I love my children. But the children feel horrible, right? And they don't feel connected. And my son told me one time, he was angry. Now, I raised him in Torah, and he walked away from it, and he was wanting to have this angry sort of kind of, I can't touch my dad physically, so I want to hurt him with my words. And he told me, he said, Dad, I don't care what you say, because I don't believe in hell anymore, and I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. That's what he said. Okay? So I was like, man, how am I going to handle this one? I said, so I stayed cool, right? I stayed calm, because by then I've sort of read the books. The books that are out there. I read them. And I was like, okay, how am I going to handle this one, man? Because inside, if you could see me, there's like torrential downpour, man. You're talking about the flood. The flood? It's going on inside. But on the outside, I'm like, just calm as can be. And I said, well, Michael, if you don't believe in, and I say his name because he's good. He's like, Dad, talk about it, because he's not like that anymore. He came back to Torah. We've got 2 awesome granddaughters. He's married, doing great. And he talks about his experience. He'll tell young people, don't leave Torah, respect your parents, obey them, connect with them, let them know how you're feeling, and all this stuff, right? And so anyway, I said, Michael, can I ask you a question? Since you don't believe in the Creator anymore? He says, yeah. What is it? I said, are you eating pork? He goes, no. He goes, I'll never eat pork. That's gross. So anyway, this Muslim guy was saying that that's not unusual for our people, whether young, Muslims or Jewish people or even I believe probably Torah keepers, that they can walk away from the faith, but they will not eat pork. And why is that? Why is that? Because that's something that's been instilled in them from infancy. You as parents have made that decision for them. And then you just support it every time they eat. And you tell them, when you go to Uncle Joe, and sorry if your name is Joe, I'm not picking on you, it's just an easy name to say, three-letter word. All right, unless it's Joel, then you got the L. When you go to Uncle Joe's, you do not eat pork, okay? And like my granddaughter told me one day, I said, honey, you want to eat some hot dogs? My mommy says, I can't eat them. I'm like, why not? Because she says we don't eat pork. Well, honey, I'm your grandpa. Like, I invented this. You're telling the inventor? I mean, that's how I felt, right? And I thought, look at her, like she's still in diapers and she's talking and she's like telling me she doesn't eat pork. Well, what I realized and what the gentleman said, I don't remember his name, but I want to take away the credit, except that he taught me a lesson. He said, we need to tell our children everything from infancy. We need to start telling them, do not eat pork. We need to start telling them, do not commit adultery. We need to start telling them everything that we don't want them to do when they become adults. Right? So we also then need to recognize that there's nothing we could do. They are going to be dealing with abandonment issues. And that when they get into their teens, they may have fears. As a child, I remember fearing that there would be war and that I would lose my grandmother, because at some point, our grandmother was the one that raised us. But, there'll be war and everybody's going to die. And what am I going to do? I'm going to be all alone. Abandonment. See? And so I think what I would recommend is that we think about those kinds of things, that we talk to, that we affirm, and that we encourage our young people and our children and reaffirm them. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. The father, the mother. Now, what about if you don't have that? You have grandparents. Reaffirm. Fill them up. Fill the cup. What about if you don't have grandparents? The assembly members. Fill the cup. You know how many non-assembly members, non-believers have affected me and molded me in a positive direction? I used to steal money from my mom when I was a little kid. Yeah, I did. I know you won't believe it, but it's true. And I used to bury it out in the yard because it was so cool. I had this plan. I could steal money from my mom. She'd never know. I could bury it out in the yard, and then I could just be kind of just walking out there, just kind of kicking the can or whatever. And then I could be like, hey, and my brother, because we were 2 years apart, I could be like, hey, Robert, come over here. Like, what? Look, there's something on the ground. And he'd be like, well, what is it? I don't know. Let's dig it up. It's $20. I just found $20 on the ground. And I had a witness. So I'd go to the store, get some stuff, come back, until one lady saw me, and she saw me digging the ground up, and I was putting money in there. And as I bent down to bury it, all of a sudden, I felt somebody go, whoop. And as I fell forward, she said, how dare you steal money from your mom? She works hard to feed you guys. And what you're doing is wrong. And I'm going to go tell her. I didn't care that she kicked me. I mean, she didn't hurt me. She was just like, But, after that, I never did it again. This was my next door neighbor. Because she taught me a lesson. Her words of, your mother loves you, and she tries to provide for you, and she has very little, and here you are stealing money from her. That's not what a son does. Impacted me to this day. To this day. I can still feel her words, her sharpness. And I feel like it changed me. I really do. And so that's what I'm saying. If you're a single mom saying, well, we don't have the dad over here, then, you've got 100 people in the assembly. Let them be the ones that are feeling that side. Let balance that side of the child and to help them. That's why the Bible talks about a tribal nature. A tribal nations and a tribal nature. And a tribal nature is not about me. It's about us. Right? It's about taking care of the children because we're all responsible for the children. It's about taking care of people, the elderly, because we're all responsible for the elderly. It's that perfect balance of what our Father has done in that we are a cup and we're born empty, and then people have the ability to fill us up. Right? And we want to be filled up with goodness. And so we have a lot of influence, a lot of things that we can do to influence people in the right direction. And I also feel like we have the responsibility to do that. So what about if your parents abandoned you? What about them? What about if you don't have a good relationship with your mom or your dad? I was that 8-year-old boy that I was telling you about. That was me. That's my personal story. And one of the things I like about this FBC, by the way, I think you guys are getting the best FBC ever, by the way. Forget about the fact that we say that every year. That doesn't matter. But I really do think that this FBC is extremely awesome because all the speakers are speaking to their own personal experience. And when you have that, when you have somebody that has that personal experience, it sort of validates what we're telling you. And I can tell you from an 8-year-old boy that when I ran after my mom, as she was going out to get on the bus, and I ran, I knew that I was not going to see her again. And I didn't see her till I was 18. So for 10 years, I did not see her. I did not talk to her. Okay? And so I knew at some point in time that I was damaged goods. I knew that I was missing out on the ability to go tell my mom, hey, Mom, I got a crush on this girl. Or when I was sick, the ability for my mom to hold me tight and to comfort me and to give me medicine and to just be there with me. I never had that. See, you miss out on so much. And I knew that. I knew that I was not whole. I knew that I had issues. Plus, I could see the effects on some of my siblings that it was having, particularly my sisters, because many of them struggled emotionally. And now, those that haven't yet forgiven our mom are struggling physically with medical problems. And that's one of the results that you're going to end up with, by the way, if you don't figure out a way to address it, if you don't figure out a way to root out, right? Root it out, get all the negative stuff out, and then figure it out, and then deal with it. Psalm 27, verse 10 is perfect for our discussion. Psalm 27, verse 10. It says, though your mom and your dad forsake you, Yahweh will firm you up. Right? Hallelujah. Though your mom or your dad forsake you, Yahweh will firm you up. Will firm you up. And so what you have to do then at some point in time, and that's what I decided in my life experience after being abandoned by my mother, and then recognizing that I never would have the experience ever. I was damaged goods for the rest of my life because I never had that connection to my mom that I wish I had. I decided one thing, that just because I missed out on it, I was not going to do that to my kids. So now I am living through them. Now, when my wife and my daughter my sons get sick, and she's out there being compassionate and loving and just doing everything that she can for them. And when they're talking about their experience in life, in college, and the things that they're dealing with, and my wife is there, I am living through them vicariously. And that was a decision that I made. That although I could not experience what that was like to have two loving parents, to be filled up with both, I couldn't do it. I decided, though I can't have that in my personal life, I am going to ensure that my children have it. Because I am not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to change it. I'm going to change everything and do what it takes to ensure that my children are firm. And that's a huge key. That's where you have to decide as a parent. As a parent. I don't care if you're a single parent. Single mom, single dad, whatever. That you've got to figure out, first of all, the root of the problem. And second of all, begin to reveal it. Begin to clean out your cup of all the poison and replace it with goodness. And seek to be restored. Because the promise has already been made. Though your father or your mother forsake you, Yahweh will not. It's like he knew it was going to happen to us. It's like he knew that we would be in a society where mothers and fathers would forsake their children and abandon them when they're 8 years old. But he gave us the solution. Because he said he's there. So believe it. First of all, believe that things happen for a reason. And that although they don't seem fair, they happen to you not because you're not special, because you're special enough for those bad things to happen to you, so that you can take those bad things in your life and turn them into something good. You're a superhero. You realize that? You're not weak. You were created to withstand being forsaken by your parents, and then recognizing at some point that your Father in heaven will not forsake you, and that he's going to be with you unto all eternity. Right? Begin to get to the root of the problem. So I want to leave you with a couple of things. One of the things that I see that I think is damaging children today, that I believe you're developing your children to have problems with abandonment issues, even though you're there in the room, is that a lot of young people are either playing video games as young parents, or they are on their cell phones too much while their child is in the room. Don't think that just because you're there, that your child is okay. Because when your child is trying to get your attention, you are training their mind, you're triggering, you're beginning the root, to implant the root of abandonment in them. And when they grow up, they're going to grow up with feeling insecurity. Because though you're there, you're not listening to them. Because you're doing this. Right? And they're there trying to get your attention. So you need to stop. First of all, you need to be responsible. Responsible parent means that your children come first. Right? You have to stop doing things that takes you away from listening to them. If your cell phone is a problem, turn it off, go put it out in the garage, and back your car up. You guys are going to have a lot of phones, out in the garage. But you've got to make that decision, the choice, to put away your phone when your child is there, because otherwise you're triggering the abandonment. Because they're there, but you're not there. And then the other thing is listen. Listen to them. Listen to what they're telling you. Watch why they're doing it. A lot of times I've seen children say, Dad, look what I did. I created this. And their dad is like, yeah, I can't watch right now. Or their mother's like, no, I can't watch right now. I got to look at this, what's going on here. And the child looks, and I've seen their faces, and they realize, okay, I have no value. Go back to doing their thing. The most important time that we have to deal with abandonment, the most important time is when our children are young. After that, you're going to be dealing with the effects. So take this serious. Do something with it. And thank you very much. Praise Yahweh.
All right. Thank you, Brother Hector. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Certainly, I related to a lot of things you said. And I just wanted to say, I've talked to young couples who are starting a marriage, and we talk about baggage that people bring into the marriage. Sure. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Chris would tell us all about the baggage you brought.
There's a lot of it. Tons.
It's a whole bus full. Yeah, anyway, I'm just playing. But one of the things that I was wondering, the abandonment that we experience can play into a trust issue with future relationships. And I was wondering, if you're, let's say a person's married to someone who's been abandoned, or maybe that person is, how can you lead someone to trust after they've experienced that abandonment?
Yeah, and that's pretty good. One of the things is to, and I believe all spouses know. It's like, oh, when this happens, he gets this way, or she gets this way. We all work on cycles, right? I mean, the calendar is a cycle: spring, right? Summer, fall, winter. And we work like that. And so we cycle out in our life experience. And when things come up, our spouses sort of understand when we're going to cycle into that. And I think that's the critical point, is to sort of have that discussion about, and the recognition of when they get to that point, before they get to that trauma point or the behavior point. And to have that discussion about, like, I think my wife at one time told me, so every time you come home on a Friday, you are ornery. And I was like, really? Not a Monday? Not a Tuesday? It's like, no, it's just Fridays. I don't know why. Well, what I realized is that at work, I was being assigned on Friday to a job that I did not want to do, and I hated it. And so what I was doing is I was bringing that home and then laying it out. Now, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I was fine. Mm-hmm. But on Fridays, I just came home exhausted. But once she told me that, then it's kind of like, oh, okay, now I need to sort of pay attention to that. So that's one of the things, is have the discussion in a way that keeps the respect and doesn't accuse somebody, but at least helps them acknowledge that there is a problem.
Sort of an accountability.
An accountability, yes, sir.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. Does anyone in the audience have a question or comment for Brother Hector here? One here in the middle.
Elise?
Sorry, Carter's all the way over there. So he's
just throw it.
Yeah, you can throw it to her. She's great at catching. With any luck, she'll miss, and we make it Dwayne. Here we go.
I was just wondering, is it still considered abandonment, like if a parent dies or is like severely ill? Mm-hmm. Like, would they still go into the same issues?
Yes, the effects are the same. Yeah, the timing is different, but the effects of the feelings of feelings of loneliness, the fear, the anxiety is the same. And that's one of the things that when Scott was talking about, about grief, he gave a great presentation on that. And one of the things that you could do as family or friends is to talk to them during that process. Ask them questions. Like, one of the biggest things that helped me when my older brother died 26 years ago was, because most of us don't want to talk, like we don't know what to say, but what you should be doing is asking questions. So what kind of stuff did he like? Was he planning on, even things like, was he planning on going to school, stuff like that? Because what it does is it really helps us we appreciate when somebody talks about them, because it makes us feel like they think they're important. But it also helps us sort of to express about, yeah, he wanted to go to college and he wanted to do all this stuff. He died at 25, and yeah, you know what I'm saying? What it does is it really kind of helps you vent out your frustrations. So yeah, the effect of abandonment or even a divorce. Like I mentioned, the lady who was, I'm telling you, she was severely beaten. But the fear of leaving and being alone was greater than the damage that she had received physically.
Okay. Thank you. Another question?
Yeah, a question, but a comment as well. I feel like that there's a lot of people that are foster parents, and I love the idea, and I love the people that sacrifice to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think as soon as they take children into their home, they get a dose of these feelings of abandonment that they have in their life, going from home to home and leaving their parents of origin, however their story rolls out. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times even young children who go through really abusive situations, whether it's sexual molestation or different kinds of abuses, violence and other things where they're removed from a home, mm-hmm. I think that even silently they can be dealing with those abandonment issues, and they feel like their parents have let them down or not stepped in to help them or to protect them, mm-hmm. and it can cause a lifetime of anxiety. And that feeling of somebody not being there for me when I needed them. And unfortunately, it's so silent that it's hard for them to talk about it or open up about it when they're so young and they're not processing it well. So I think that there's a lot of people that struggle with that, and they really need to get that out of them, but it's really difficult to do. So I really appreciate people who are in foster care and doing that job, because it's so demanding and taxing on their emotions, but it's also something those children vitally need. Yeah. And I think it's just, the heart of abandonment is really one that's a struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a big deal. When I used to be a juvenile counselor, but I used to work with families, and all of the young people, adolescents that I work with, all of them that were in criminal behaviors, all of them had abandonment issues because they'd all been abandoned by their mom or their dad. And I can think of 3 of them that committed suicide. One of them I knew really good, like really, really good. I would say he was a really good kid and one of my favorites. But he committed suicide because his dad had committed suicide. And the abandonment was something we just could not get past it. And unfortunately, he was 14 years old and he committed suicide. So that was a tragedy. But that was related back to his dad doing the same thing, and he always felt abandoned. He just never felt complete. So it's a big deal. Yep, thank you.
A comment right behind there, and then we've got one in the back in the middle.
Just a reflection on what we're talking about tribes, mm-hmm. and the church is a type of tribe.
Yes, sir.
For us. American culture is so fragmented. There's some of that, but mm-hmm. the church is tribe. But in Africa, where they do have tribes, there's a lot of orphanages, mm-hmm. Particularly where I worked in Zambia. Mm-hmm. And people are trying to support that. Yet there are tribes around. What happened there is because they had such devastation from AIDS, mm-hmm. Where at one point over 25% of the adults had AIDS and were going to be dead within 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. Left a lot of orphaned children. And even infants, when the mother died, if it was a nursing infant, they often threw the baby in the grave with the mother alive. Right. Because there was no way they could not feed.
Take care of them. Mm-hmm.
Many times there were infants drugged right out of the grave and brought to an orphanage. And I say this just for our reflection involved in these missions and ministries, mm-hmm. is that the tribe is the answer to that, mm-hmm. because there are programs where these infants who were literally pulled from the grave, mm-hmm. 2-3 years later, when they are viable, mm-hmm. can be returned back to the tribe, mm-hmm. and they will be welcomed.
Sure.
But instead, they are institutionalized. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And so we need to think about that as well from our position.
Absolutely. It made me, I touched on it a little bit, but I didn't really clarify it. The reason why I am the man that I am is not because of my mom, because she left me when I was 8, but it's because of my grandmother and my grandfather. Because they then took us in and filled the cup and did everything that they could to love us, to take care of us, to nurture us. So all the things that my mom didn't do, my grandmother took the lead until I was 10, and then my dad brought me up here to Illinois. So I credit my grandmother with that tribal mindset of, okay, right? And sort of that's how the assembly needs to be working. Because if we do that, we would save so many kids from having all kinds of problems. Because again, fill the cup with goodness and support and advice. And a kick in the butt if somebody's stealing money from their mom.
Now we have a comment right back here.
In dealing with a situation where, it's always best to have the two parents, like you talked about, involved in a child's life.
Yes.
But being the other parent, trying to determine what's in the best interest of a child. Is it better to have the parent in and out of a child's life, or is it better to, kind of like what you experienced, to not go through? I mean, the pain is going to have its effect either way, but to go through just the one abandonment and then deal with it as an adult. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I think for something like that, you sort of have to know the child, see how they're doing, see how they're feeling. If the father's being involved in their life and they're just struggling and they're being abused and all that stuff, they're better off without father or mother if they're being abused, in some way. So if they're in danger, you don't want to expose them to that. And then you support them. You work through that in the community and encourage them to build up. Not everybody, by the way, that has abandonment experiences or abandonment issues grows up to drink. Not everybody grows up to be an alcoholic, and not everybody has bad relationships. That just doesn't happen. Yes, they struggle emotionally, but most of us grew up and became capable adults. We got married, we had kids, and we're moving on with our life. And so the biggest thing, I think, is if they're in danger, you get them out. But if they're not, some of the adolescents that I worked with, it surprised me. Some of the things that were done by their mothers to these boys, and they didn't care. They still wanted to have that relationship. Of course, in that case, we couldn't control it because the state said, no, you're not going to have it. But just in talking to them, you saw that they felt like something was missing. And that's the biggest thing. I felt like the same way. Something's missing with me. Not something's wrong, but something's missing. And so, again, if the child is in danger, pull them out and then work with the community to build them up. So I don't know if that helps your, okay.
A great question. Thank you, ma'am. And a question or comment here?
You brought up the mother abandoning, but I think in America the major deal is the dad's abandoning.
Sure.
And we have more than 1 in 100 people, men are in prison.
Yes, sir.
And if you talk to those men in prison about their dads, I mean, almost all of them will say that their dad abandoned them. But it's just a major. The dads abandoning the children is a major crisis in America.
Yes. So I was a correctional officer before I was a counselor for 12 years. And absolutely. I met a guy one time because I was on the crisis team member, so I would go anytime they had a crisis, somebody was going off, getting violent, whatever, they would call us to kind of try to do de-escalation techniques and kind of help them calm down. And one of the guys they called me was like, I'm not lying, I've said this story before, he was like 6 foot high, 300 pounds, big old white power kind of guy with the swastika and all this stuff. And, and I'm thinking, you want me to go in there? Are you crazy? Like, send Keith, Anyway, right. Anyway, so I went in there and talked to him. And what I found out and what we talked about was the relationship that he did not have with his dad as a child. He had been sexually abused as a child. He felt like his dad left him, did not protect him, and he was angry at his mom had been there, but she was an alcoholic and all this stuff. But that was the biggest deal, is that he was so angry at his dad. And he said, I don't hate people, but because I had such a bad relationship with my dad, then that turned me into this world. And now he had converted to Christianity, and so he still had all the marks, but he had gotten into a vehicle in a truck. They had bombed his truck, and it blew off, so he had kind of part of his leg missing, and he had all this stuff, stuff going on. But he said, he basically admitted what you're saying, the father was the one that he was missing, not have a good relationship with him.
Last comment here.
I think it's important that we realize the depth of the damage and the effects of abandonment. I appreciate Brother Dwayne making a mention of the foster families, because we're an advocate for foster families. My family, Amanda and I, are registered Georgia certified foster family, and we experience this on a regular basis with bringing children into our home. That we experience the effects of what they have labeled now as a lot of times, which is called, they refer to it as RAD. Yeah. It's reactive attachment disorder. And because of the effects of abandonment, it makes a detrimental effect on their ability to connect and to develop healthy relationships. Yeah. And that's very important. And we see in the scripture where it says true and undefiled religion is providing for the widows and the orphans. And in a sense, just like he mentioned in the circumstance in Africa, that's what they are, in a sense, when they come into care and they come into our home, they have been abandoned in some form. And seeing the effects from very, very small children, even in our own daughter. We have one daughter that we fostered. We got her when she was 5 months old. Many of you have met her, Kenna, and she is 9 now. And we saw the effects of the beginning onsets of reactive attachment disorder at 5 months old.
Oh, yeah.
Because she had not developed a relationship and bonded with a mother figure. Yeah. And that was very difficult to see Amanda sit and attempt to do what most normal mothers do, and to rock and hold their children and rock back and forth to try to soothe them to sleep, and to her to fight and want to be left alone because the effects of RAD had already began that she had been experienced from abandonment.
Yeah, thank you. That's powerful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Let's give Brother Hector some more appreciation here, and thank you so much for bringing that topic today.
Thank you.